Hi, I'm Wendy from the Roanoke Public Library, and this is part of our ongoing series of genealogy tutorials for the beginning genealogist. Now, if you haven't seen our first tutorial, it talks about the steps you should take if you are a brand new genealogist and have never done it before, and what do you need to do before you start doing your research. In this tutorial, we're going to be talking about vital records. Vital records are good to have because they give a lot of clues to help you get back to the previous generation. Vital records are going to be your birth, marriage, divorce, and death records. And these are going to be records that were issued by a government agency such as a county or a state. Now, two reference sources that you should be aware of is the Red Book and FamilySearch Wiki. And it's the reason why it's important to know these two resources is because they will tell you when a county started issuing a birth, marriage, or death certificate, and also when that county was established. For instance, if you are looking for a death record in 1865 from Adams County, you're not going to find it because they didn't start issuing a death certificate until 1877. So knowing when a county started issuing these types of records will help you be more organized in your research and not waste time and effort looking for a record that never existed. Another thing you want to know is when that county was established. So if you are looking at a person and they are living in Bond County and you're looking for records pre-1817, don't go to Bond County to find those records because Bond wasn't even a county prior to 1817. You need to go to the parent counties. So FamilySearch, as well as the Red Book, will give you that information of when they started issuing birth, marriage, and death records, and also when the county was established and where they were, who their parent counties were before they were established. I'm going to be showing you a couple examples of birth, marriage, and death certificates just so that you know the type of information that you could find. Now, one thing you need to know is that there is no format that is consistent throughout the country by all the counties that is being used. You will see all kinds of different formats. For instance, this one is from Maine and this one is from Indiana. Now, they both ask and give similar information. They tell you the name of the child, when the child was born, whether the child is male or female, the name of the parents, where the parents were born, how old the parents were whenever the birth occurred, and the occupations of the parents. Both of them give that information, but there's other questions that are a little bit different on each of the birth certificates. For example, on the one from Maine, it asks how many children did this mother have, and she had 9. On this one, it says, was this a single birth or a multiple birth? And if this is a multiple birth, like a twin, what order was this child, the first or the second in this birth? Down here it says how many children does the parent have, the mother have, and out of those children, how many are living. So in this instance, this mother has 1 child, including the one that was just born. So this means that this is the first child of this mother. And how many are living? 1. So this gives you an idea. About this household. Now this one says this mother had 9 children, but it does not ask how many of those children are living. So you don't know out of those 9 children if there's any stillborns or if there was any miscarriages. You just know she had 9 children. Now, I do want to point out, I told you that they list the occupations of the parent. Like this is a carpenter and a housekeeper. This is a farmer and a housewife. Now, it says housekeeper. And one of the things as a genealogist you need to do is not make assumptions. So, in you could assume that she is a housekeeper and that means she's taking care of someone else's home. But that may be a wrong assumption to make, because when I was looking at all of the records and I was glancing through and looking at all the mothers, there was so many that were housekeepers. So I'm not sure if they were all housekeepers taking care of other people's homes, or if this county clerk was using the word housekeeper to mean she was keeping house. She was keeping her own house. She was a housewife. She was a homemaker. She was at home. So there's different words. So we're not sure what that county clerk meant, and I just want to caution you on making assumptions. So I think in looking at all of the records, I think that the county clerk meant she was a housewife. But again, when you're looking at records, don't make assumptions. This is a ledger book that was at a county courthouse, a county clerk's office, and it is a register of births, and it has similar information, but not all the information that was on the other two records. Again, this is at the county clerk's office. It says the name of the child, the birth of the child was female. It talks about the nationality of the child, where the parents were born, the nationality of the parents, and what they did for a living. Similar, but not all the information that were on the other certificates of birth. Now, this is what's called a delayed certificate of birth. You'll notice that this was issued in 1952 for a woman that was born in 1887. So that means that she sent all kinds of records to the state of Tennessee in order to get a birth certificate. So she sent in an original family Bible record, affidavit of a non-relative, and an affidavit of her sister, and other information in order to get a birth certificate. I know that my grandmother has a delayed certificate of birth because she was born at home, and she had to send in similar information to her state whenever she started working, and she had to have a social security card, she had to have a birth certificate, and so she had to send all that stuff in order to get a delayed certificate of birth. This is just the backside of that certificate, and it talks about the affidavits and the signature of that sister. Now, when we're talking about marriage records, there's two sets of marriage records you need to be aware of. One are those records that are established before the marriage, and then those records that are established after the marriage happens. So the types of records that would be created before the marriage would be a license. Another would be a marriage bond. A marriage bond is money that is put up by the groom and the bride to make sure that they are both legally able to wed. They don't have an existing marriage. They aren't closely related, or they are both of age and they are both legal and able to get married. And if they find out that the county finds out that those conditions did not exist, then they forfeit the bond. The other would be a marriage record, a marriage certificate. A marriage register and return is whenever the bride and groom get married, and either the justice of the peace or the minister writes in a ledger and it's called the minister return or the return, and they write down when they got married. Then they turn it into the um, county clerk's office, and then the county clerk takes that information and writes it in the register book and registers that they did get married. So you will come across marriage register records or minister return records. Again, the return is what the minister or the justice of the peace returned to the register and to the county clerk's office, and then it got registered there. So I'm going to show you an example of a marriage bond. So you have this lady here. Her last name is Arnold, and John Arnold put up the bond. Typically, whenever a bond is for the bride, it's usually the father or an uncle or a brother or guardian that puts up the money for the bride. And then John Boyle put up the money for John Boyle, who is the groom. Now, that could be the same person, or it could be that's a father and son. We're not sure. And you don't want to make any kinds of assumptions when you're doing genealogy. There is one, whenever I first saw this record, there's one thing that looked odd to me, and I wasn't sure why they would do that. I did some research and found the answer, but I will post below in the comments below why I thought this was odd, and then I will post the answer whenever the legal genealogist Judy Russell was also talking about marriage bonds, and she addressed what I'm seeing that is odd. She addressed that in her in a comment that she made, and I'm curious if anyone else is seeing what I'm seeing and thinking this is odd. So anyway, I'm going to, in the comments below, I will tell you what I thought was odd about this record and Judy Russell's answer as to why a marriage bond would have that information on there. This is a marriage license. And this is they get the license, and this is before the marriage. So a lot of times the marriage does occur, but it is possible that somebody will be issued a marriage license but they never got married. So you can't assume they got married. And also you have to be aware, sometimes people will use the date that the marriage license was issued, but that's not necessarily the date of the marriage. This is another example of a marriage license, and you'll notice that this one has a lot more information than the other marriage license. And this one has the birthplace of the parents, not the parents, of the people getting married, and mother's maiden name, father's name, whether or not this is the groom's first marriage, or in this case, second marriage, whether or not, if she's a widow, what was her maiden name, just all kinds of stuff is listed, their ages, whereas the other one did not have all this information. Now, this is a marriage register. So whenever you're looking at a document, you want to look at columns, and you want to know what each of these columns mean. So this is the date of the license, this is the date of the marriage, and this is when the justice of the peace or the minister returned the information to the county clerk's office. And you'll notice this is the people that did the marriage. So here's ministers and justice of the peace. This is their names. Oops. Sorry about that. So this is who did the marriage. And you'll notice that this is listed by the date of the license, not chronological by the date of the marriage. So when you're looking at a document and you're looking at a book, you want to make sure you go a few pages before and a few pages afterwards when you're looking for information. And because it could be that someone got their license and then they didn't get married until 2 weeks later. And so you need to take a look, and you may be searching a little bit because it's not chronological by the date of marriage, it's chronological by the date of the license. And again, every register is going to be different, and this is just an example of one. But whenever you're looking at any kind of record, focus in on the column headings. Now, this is a marriage certificate, and they got married in 1861, but this marriage certificate was issued 1890. So what this means is Susan Pridgeon is my ancestor, and she was married to John W. Heather, and she was his widow, and he was a Civil War veteran. And so she was applying for her widow's pension, and she had to establish that she was, in fact, married to John Wesley Heather. So she had to go to the clerk of the county and get a marriage certificate to prove that she was married to him. So this is what I would call a secondary source, not a primary source, because this Rodney Kelly, what he did was he went to the registered books, the marriage register book in the county. He looked it up and he wrote down the information, and he wrote this down, and then he gave it to Susan. Now, it's probably accurate and probably all that information is correct, but he could have made a mistake, or there may be more information that's in the register or the document that he was looking at the county clerk's office. There may be more information on that document that's not on here, because this is a form letter. He's just filling out the information that's required on this form, but there may be all kinds of more information that is in that original document that he's not putting here. So this is a good clue, but it wouldn't be considered a primary source. Now, this is an example of a divorce register from Michigan, and the information that's on here is the name of the bride, or the husband and the wife, when they got married, where they got married, if they have children, how many children they have, the reason for the divorce, who is asking for the divorce, and whether or not it was granted or pending or not granted. So again, everything that's crossed out is pending, and the ones that are not crossed out on this register are the ones that were granted. So it is possible that you find a divorce register and find that someone asked for a divorce, but it was never granted. But anyway, this is a copy of the kind of information you could find from a divorce record. Now, this is a death certificate from Virginia. This is a death certificate from Virginia, and this is a lot of information is pretty consistent on other death certificates. It talks about the name of the person. It talks about the reason for their death. It asks for their birth date. It asks for their death date, the name of their father, where their father was born, the name of their mother, and where their mother was born, and the maiden name of the mother. So death certificates are really good clues to get you back to previous generations. But death certificates are only as good as the person that is the informant, who is this Mrs. Hill on this instance. And Mrs. Hill, unfortunately, didn't know. She knew that this woman was a widow, but does not know the woman's name of her husband. She doesn't know the date of birth, but she knows that she was about 75 years old, and she doesn't know the name of the father, where he was born, or the name of the mother. So a death certificate is only as good as the informant providing this kind of information. Now, this type of information, the reason of the death, when she died, and where she was buried, that's all good information, because that's, as it's happening, they're putting that down. It's all this kind of information, the name of the parents and the name of the husband and the birth date, that is only as good as the informant. Now, there can be times where errors will pop up in which the informant, the person making, giving this information, is giving false information, in that they're not quite sure and they thought that they knew, and they give the wrong name, or they say that, oh yeah, the mother's maiden name was such and such, in which it wasn't, or the mother was born someplace, but in Kentucky, but it's Tennessee. So errors will pop up at times on death certificates. This right here, this 101A, is a really good clue, and it's usually written in red, and it's different codes, and it is the classification of the death. So if you are looking at this, at the cause of death, and you can't read it, and there's a code, if you go to wolfbane.com, it will give you the International Classification of Diseases, and you look up in the right book. So she died in 1922, so I looked in the 1920 International Classification of Diseases. I looked up at 101A, and I found the cause of death right here. Now, if you can't read the person's handwriting, this is a good place to check to find out what the cause of death is. And that International Classification of Diseases started in 1900, and every 10 years there was an update. So you want to look in the correct book. Now, this is another example of what you might see at a county clerk's office. These are 6 different people right here. And this gives you this similar information that was on the death certificate that we were looking at before, like the cause of death and the name of the parents and their birth date and all kinds of stuff like that. Now, this is a register of deaths from Arizona, and this has a lot less information on it. It has the person's name, the date of birth, their nationality, the undertaker's name, the physician's name, and what they died of. But it doesn't give any kind of information about the parents. So what we're going to be doing in the next tutorials, we'll be talking about where you can find these records. And so I will be showing you Ancestry, FamilySearch, and state archives and county clerk's offices and Department of Health's libraries and state and regional genealogical societies, and then a website called US Gen Web. These are the 2 resources I was talking about before, the Red Book and FamilySearch Wiki, where you could go straight to those to get information about the county history and the dates in which they were issuing birth, marriage, and death certificates. And also, this is the website for the Roanoke Public Libraries, as well as our genealogy department, which is the Virginia Room, and the Virginia Room's email. They focus, and their primary focus is genealogy for Virginia. So if you're stumped and your brick wall is a person in Virginia, if you want to touch base, send an email to the staff at the Virginia Room. They may be able to point you in the right direction. Our next tutorial will be about finding vital records on Ancestry.com. Thank you for watching, and stay tuned for the next one. Thank you. Bye-bye.